All right, thanks for coming, guys. I appreciate you guys logging in early again. Today, July 28th. It's roughly 6:03. Looks like we have 18 slides today, so we should be done pretty much on time. I'm thinking. Let's get started. Today, we'll be doing part 2 of how to work a file. I did send out the handout that I mentioned last week, which actually involves both parts 1 and part 2. We'll be covering part 2. You can follow along on the handout if you like, but it's pretty much all on the screen. So there is my information. You guys know how to get a hold of me if you have questions or comments, or you are working on something and you need to find a solution. I will be muting you on my side, but you guys are welcome to chime in anytime. I don't necessarily like to do a monologue. I definitely like to have conversations with you guys because having Zoom meetings is rather interpersonal. So feel free to chime in if you guys have questions or comments. If you just don't quite understand something, feel free to chime in, okay? But mute yourself afterwards, mainly because background noise is somewhat of a distraction. And you can also put your questions in the chat. I'll try to get to the questions after each slide, okay? Thank you guys for logging in early again. And as always, we try to keep things on the positive side. One of the reasons why I do the training, mainly to try and gather business, but for the most part to share good information. So feel free to share the link or the meeting ID with anybody that you feel could benefit from these meetings, okay? Licensed or not, doesn't matter. This is all good information and we definitely like to share. That's how we are around here. Okay, so any questions or comments before we get started? Okay, so let's get going. We'll probably have a few interruptions, people usually logging in at 6:10, what have you. But I am trying to get started on time. So 6:05, so we're doing pretty good. So let's talk about last week's session. We talked about actually making the offer, when the offer gets accepted, getting the information to and from escrow, opening the escrow, which primarily means depositing the money. Usually is done by wire. If you look at the contract on section 2, page 1, it talks about electronic funds, which means wire. A lot of people actually write in wire. No need to do that on the RPA. And of course, we always recommend a transaction coordinator service and getting that information to your TC, informing the lender, which is actually very, very important. As soon as you get accepted offer, it's important to get that information over to the lender so they can get started. Because I'll be honest with you, the financing piece of the financing piece of any transaction is the most important and usually the one that takes most time. So typically everything else is done and you're kind of waiting for the lender to do their thing to get your deal closed or to get your transaction closed. So getting that information over to the lender is paramount. And then ordering inspections. I wouldn't wait on that either. A lot of listing agents nowadays and sellers are pressing on inspection dates and what have you. They don't like the standard contract if it seems like the buyer is going to back out for whatever reason. So that's why they like to squeeze those dates. Contractually it says 17 days, but you try to squeeze them down into 7 to 10 days usually, which is fairly difficult at times. So make sure that you order inspections early on. Another thing too, a lot of times the listing agents and the sellers already have some of those inspections, but just remember that you still have to sign a waiver if you don't actually perform the termite and home inspection yourself. In other words, if it's given to you by the seller, you still have to sign a waiver because you didn't order those inspections. Okay. Is there coercion in the world? Yeah. So that's why you need to get a waiver from your buyer if you get those inspections from the seller. Writing and delivering disclosures and reports. We talked about that last week. there are statutory, contractual, and then civil disclosures. We talk about those three pillars. And so different brokerages have different wants and needs in terms of what they're willing to do. Most of the time, the guys that have been sued are the guys that are looking for all the disclosures, looking for everything, right? And then you have the individuals that are a little bit more diligent, that they're looking for, maybe a few less. And then you have the people that have never been sued, never even heard about anybody getting sued. They just want the bare minimum. So I always recommend the majority of the disclosures, both, obviously statutory, you need to get those are required by law, contractual because they're on the contract. And then, the civil ones are usually the ones that people say, we don't need those. I always try to get them anyway, right? We're trying to protect the liability and interests of the brokers, and obviously don't want any legal entanglements and or lawsuits coming about, on our side, and especially not to our clients. It's just bad business. So I always recommend getting those disclosures signed and over to and the reports over to the listing agent / seller. And we talked about a time frame. 14B of the contract of the RPA talks about that they're usually delivered and or expected right around the time that the contingencies are removed. Okay, and that, again, that's contractual. And then ordering conditions, covenants, and restrictions, or CC&Rs, and the HOA docs. Typically, the escrow takes care of that. However, getting a jump start on that is usually a good idea because the HOAs take their sweet time getting that information to you, and it could hold up your deal. Okay, make sure that escrow's on top of that. Make sure that that you potentially could also get involved in getting a hold of that information. There's usually a fee involved, so make sure that you know who's paying for it. You want to negotiate who's paying for it, buyer or seller, right? So make sure that it's in your contract. Okay. So any questions or comments on that slide? That was last week, so I kind of went over that a little fast. Okay. So let's get started on part 2. Okay, here's a quick overview. So moving forward, so now we're kind of in the middle of a transaction, if you will. So you want to get the client's approval and making a decision. So what does that mean? Well, I always tell the guys, and when I talk about the guys, everybody that I talk to about this, okay, is that you don't want to send in a request for repairs until you have everything. Meaning that if you don't have the NHD, if you don't have the appraisal, if you don't have say one or two of the disclosures that maybe they forgot to send, okay, you don't want to send in a request for repairs. Now remember that on 14B3 of the contract, you guys might want to write that down. 14B3, the RPA talks about that if the seller is required to give you certain information, both contractually and or statutory, and they haven't given it to you, and let's say they're approaching their contingency periods, and a lot of times I've had these listing agents pretty much yelling and screaming, okay, the date is up, you got to remove contingencies. And I pretty much tell them, no, we don't, because you guys haven't given us everything. And the HOA docs is one of them. So this is why I was saying before that the HOA docs, it's important to get those, because I believe if you look at section 10, the very first paragraph, there's a comment there that says that this contract is contingent on anything. It doesn't matter what it is. So if there's contingencies, it can be anything. So to be clear, I don't normally make a request for repairs until I have everything, because I want to make one request, and let me tell you why. In my experience, when you actually send in a request for repairs into a client, into a seller, okay, number one, they don't have to respond, but most sellers are fairly reasonable, I would say, most of the time, and a lot of times they're going to respond. The problem is that let's say you say, okay, yeah, you know what, I want the seller to repair some leaky plumbing in the bathroom. So you send in a request for repairs because you got the home inspection back, but you haven't gotten the appraisal back yet. So all of a sudden the seller says, okay, yeah, I'll fix the plumbing, right? And then you get the appraisal a couple of days later, and it comes out like $5,000 short. So then you say, okay, you know what, you send in another request for repairs, and you say, oh, you know what, I want to get the reduction in price because the appraisal came in low, right? And then let's say a few days later after that, you get the termite report in, and then you send in another request for repairs, and it says, I would like the seller to take care of the termite clearance. Well, let me tell you that most people, and I would say I'm probably in this group, that if I have somebody that's continually making requests on something, at some point I'm going to say no. Okay, so this is why I would always recommend to have everything in first before you make a request for repairs. So you're gonna make a blanket statement. So instead of saying, okay, yeah, it's gonna cost $500 to fix the plumbing, and let's say that the termite is like $1,200, and the appraisal is 5,000 short. Instead of doing those 3 requests, instead what I might do is I might say, okay, let's reduce the price 7,000, and that would be my request. So I'm not even talking about the plumbing or the termite, although I'm using that as my reason for the reduction in price. Typically, and this is what I found, is that the sellers usually will try and meet you halfway or some of the way, or sometimes all of the way if you make one request. But the point is that I'm fully disclosed. And when I say me, I mean the buyer is fully disclosed. He's got the appraisal, he's got the NHD, he's got the escrow instructions, all the disclosures, all the information that he needs to make a decision to move forward. Because on the request for repairs, if the seller agrees to that reduction in that example that I gave you, in the verbiage on the request for repairs, it talks about that if they agree, that they then agree to remove the inspection contingency or the investigation contingency. Okay, so that's the reason why you want to have all that information in front of you. And I got a little long-winded on that one, and I know that was a little bit more detailed, but I feel strongly about that one point because I have a lot of agents that like to do a bunch of requests for repairs because they can, and it's not a good idea negotiating wise. Okay, if you want to be an aggressive negotiator, do it once, hard and fast. Okay, so we want to give and get the loan approval, right? Deliver executed inspections and disclosures to the other side, right? So once we do make that request, usually, okay, yeah, here you go. Here's all the disclosures signed by the buyer, right? And then get loan docs, right? So pretty much that's what we're waiting for at that point, right? So then we do the final walkthrough, deliver the closing funds. So the buyer, typically the deposit isn't enough to complete what you have between the loan now and the sales price. You have a little gap. So usually there's some monies that the buyer needs to bring in, right? The grant deed records, pretty much at that point you take possession, right? And then you get your closing package. So in a nutshell, that is a quick overview what we'll be talking about today. And I don't know why I got a feeling that everything I just talked about in terms of the request for repairs is probably coming up, right? I did review this earlier, but I don't remember seeing that. So let's keep moving. Any questions or comments on the overview? Okay, well, let's keep moving. Okay. Items that are usually included in a contingency and time frame include appraisal, loan approval, inspection, and short sale. The CAR form RPA indicates 17 days unless otherwise agreed and should be paid close attention to. If you need more time, ask for it. Use CAR form ETA or extension of time addendum and address the additional time you need. At this point, you may also address a renegotiation of price, terms and condition, and can be addressed on the CAR form RR or request for repairs. If you're not asking for more time, you will be asking to submit a CAR form CR or contingency removal. The CR allows you to remove contingencies either altogether or by line item. Once it is known whether you are going to proceed, it may be necessary to address the continuance of the transaction via addendum to discuss any change in terms or conditions, otherwise known as repair response. So it's kind of what I was talking about earlier, although these are the actual forms that you use, right? But it's important that if you are reaching expiration times, okay, don't leave a gap in your transaction, right? If you need more time for something, simply ask for it. Now, remember that we don't do anything verbally. So if you're going to ask for something, do it in writing. So if we're going to ask for, let's say, hey, we need additional 5 days because, the inspector hasn't delivered the inspection yet, or the appraiser hasn't been able to get out to the property, or whatever the case is, ask for more time. There's no shame in that, right? But primarily it is a request, okay? But you're pretty much letting the other side know, and you're communicating with them that you need more time. And it's not that you're stalling, okay? What I would say is that the agents that aren't doing this, they give the appearance of stalling because they're not communicating. So understand that by keeping an open line of communication, it kind of puts the other side mind at ease, right? That you are not playing games with them and you're not stalling. So my recommendation is to make the request. If you need more time, simply ask for it, but you're not asking for it verbally or by email. You're simply writing it on an extension of time addendum, and you're getting it signed, and you're sending it to the other side. They fully understand. Now, they may call you and ask you why, and that's your opportunity to explain. But at the end of the day, you're making that extension. Any questions or comments on that? All right, let's keep moving here. So loan approval, usually the loan approval has prior to doc conditions. Sometimes as agents, we can help with this process. Communicate with the lender, escrow, and your client to address these conditions. And sorry, let me log this person in real quick. Communicate with lender, escrow, and your client to address these conditions and satisfy them. One of these is typically a termite completion. Take particular attention that it may take some time to get that work completed. So it's important that if the parties agree that there is going to be a termite completion, remember that they have to send workers out to the property to do the work. And I would say at minimum 1 day, and I've seen some of them that take 2 days, okay? So you have to allow for that. Now, if they tent the property, sometimes it might take more like 3 or 4 days. So they might tent the property, they got to take the tent down. And then what happens is that there's another termite inspector that goes out, and then he tags the property that the work has been completed. And he puts like a form up on the door that work has been complete. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll take a picture of that, or I'll scan it, and I'll put it in the file. And that pretty much shows that the work was completed, and then that termite inspector went out and checked that it was done right. And the reason why, we think of termite workers as kind of grunt workers. No. They're highly technical because they're working with dangerous chemicals, okay? And so these guys, they know what they're doing, right? They're no joke. And so they have an organization that's looking out for that whole industry. Those termite inspectors go out. They don't work for the company that you hired. They work for like the termite organization. I can't remember what they're called, but they do go out and they check because, again, this is hazardous chemicals that they're working with. And so let's keep moving here. Please note that it may be in violation to be in possession of or transfer your client's personal financial information, such as 1099s, tax returns, verification of employment, profit and loss statements, etc. Do yourself a favor and allow your lender to communicate and retrieve this information from your borrower. Okay. Now, a lot of us are in practice of giving proof of funds. Just remember that when you're giving out that information, you want to black out the account numbers. And if there's any social security numbers, you do not want to give confidential information at any time. Okay. Now, there's always a question about the seller's affidavit, and there's a section there where it talks about the TIN or even the social security number of a client, and you never fill that out ever. Okay. I understand that information is there for a reason, or that form is there for a reason, but we never do it. Let escrow take care of that. Let the lenders take care of that. That's what they do. Okay. Any questions or comments on that? Everybody knows what a seller's affidavit is? You know what? I still get phone calls from brokers as to what that is, okay? IRC 1445, which is Internal Revenue Code, right? They still don't understand it. And I'll be honest with you, it is rather confusing, but once you see the chain of events that has to happen with a person of non-foreign status, which means that they're not a U.S. citizen that owns a piece of property in the U.S., there is a process to it, right? But the majority of times, with pretty much all of us, and I'll be honest with you, in my 32 years of doing real estate, I've never come across one. Every single one has been a U.S. citizen, so I've never had to deal with it. But there is a process to it. So loan documents are available for endorsement, right? So now the loan docs hit escrow. The lender or escrow will notify you that loan documents are ready to sign. It is important that your client communicate with the lender or escrow to set up an appointment to sign those documents. It is important that all parties applying for the loan is present and have two legal forms of identification if the agent, are not present at the signing. Now, excuse me, the reason why they need two forms of ID is because they're going to be fingerprinted, and the documents that they're signing are being notarized. Okay, that also is true about the seller. The seller needs to sign a grant deed. Now, sometimes the seller will sign a grant deed outside of escrow, which is okay. But just remember that the notary usually has to be certified by the title company, the one that you're using, okay? So here's a quick tip, okay? It is important that your client verify the rate, terms, and payment arrangements that are indicated on the loan documents prior to signing. I have found them at times to be incorrect. Once they are signed, it will induce prior to funding conditions, which are usually handled by the escrow, title, and lender. So again, it's important, if you're not going to be at the signing, in other words, you the agent and you're representing the buyer, if you're not going to be sitting with the loan agent to go over your loan documents, okay, you want to verify the rate, terms, and the payment arrangements, because I have found them to be incorrect. I'll be honest with you, escrow agents are not responsible for that. All they do is receive them and then pass them over to the notary for them to be signed, because they're not the loan agent. They're not even the lender, okay? The lender could even be sitting, your loan officer could even be sitting there, and they are quite frankly not even the ones who drew those documents. But you can verify the rate, terms, and payment arrangements, okay? Make sure that they are correct. Hey, everybody makes mistakes. It's always one of those things where you want a separate set of eyes to look at that stuff, especially because you're looking into the future, like 30 years. Typically, those documents are a 30-year contract of installment payments, okay? So not a bad idea to look over that information. Any questions or comments on that? All right, moving right along. All right, so the final walkthrough. At this point, the property should be ready for transfer and occupancy unless otherwise agreed. An inspection with both the buyer and seller should be scheduled to do a final cursory inspection of the property to ensure all the items of the agreement have been met and the property is in similar or same condition as it was originally introduced and discovered. And that was a mouthful, but I'll be honest with you. Some people get this confused with it being like another inspection. It's not another inspection. Typically at this point, the contingencies have already been removed, meaning that the buyer can no longer cancel, okay? And neither can the seller for that matter, okay? And really they're just verifying if they had asked for any work to be done, they're verifying that it was done, right? Or not. Because if it isn't, then the next sentence here talks about the VP, or the verification of property condition, that you can write it down there that it wasn't performed, okay? So let's move on. And that any work that was agreed upon was completed. If not, there is a section on the VP, or the verification of property condition form, to place any items of concern. So now, remember, the final walkthrough is not an inspection to bring up more stuff, okay? It's simply an inspection to see that the property is in the same condition as it was as when you originally made the offer, and that any stuff that was agreed upon during the transaction, that's where you would note it. Now, if there's nothing to note, then you could say that. There's nothing to note if the property is the same, right? And actually, the form actually says that, okay? and then you have a large paragraph that you can write stuff in if you feel that there's other things maybe that the seller didn't do that you had agreed upon during the transaction. Okay. There is the section 2. I'm trying to remember. I think it's section 11, and it talks about that you're buying the property as is, but there is a paragraph there that the seller is responsible for removing pretty much any personal effects and any trash. So it's what we call in the industry broom swept. Okay, the property should be left broom swept, meaning that if there's any trash or anything left behind, that is contractual. Okay, so you could write that down on a VP that, oh, they left the couch or they left even a swing set. Okay, that wasn't intended to be left there, and you could potentially call them and have them come pick it up even after closing. Okay, so any questions or comments on that slide? We're moving pretty good. We're on slide 8 of 18, and we're coming up on 6:29 or 6:30. So quick question. Okay, let's do a pop quiz. Okay, let's see if you guys can chime in here. If the seller did not finish the work as agreed, will it stall the closing of a transaction? So let's say that the seller was supposed to remove that swing set, and the swing set was still there after closing. Or could that stall the closing? Could the buyer call escrow and say, don't close escrow because they haven't removed the swing set yet? Is that something the buyer could do? Anybody? You guys don't know? Come on, take a guess. What is your knee-jerk reaction? Let me say this. The buyer or seller cannot stop escrow from closing for that reason. Okay, so by rights, it shouldn't, but it could if the buyer and seller agreed to extend it. So let's say that the buyer calls up the list or his agent, and then the agent calls the listing agent and says, hey, you know, this thing's supposed to be there. Can we extend the closing a few days so they can get it out of there? That's a possibility, okay? But they could say no, and they could close the transaction. Then it becomes a civil matter, and really just a request. You know, they can request for them to come and remove it, and they can come and get it and get it out of there. Or it could be a small claims, right? They can take it to small claims. They can potentially get it removed and then charge the seller in small claims for the damages, right? Oh, it cost me 150 bucks to get it out of there, so I want the 150 bucks back, right? That could be the problem. But in terms of the question, can it stall the closing? And quite frankly, unless the buyer and seller agree, escrow has to close. That's their instructions. Any questions or comments on that? Let's do a funny. So if ghosts can walk through walls and glide downstairs, why don't they fall through the floor? I thought this picture was funny, although I don't know if it's real, but I'm noticing there is a lady standing right here looking up. So it's almost like she actually watched it happen, right? I thought that was pretty funny. That's a good one. All right, so coming up on slide 11, so we're moving along pretty good. So deliver closing funds. So typically the buyer will have to satisfy the remainder of the required down payment and closing costs. Have your client deliver the estimate amount determined by escrow as demonstrated when delivering the earnest money deposit, or an EMD, right? So you know, usually you're depositing 5,000. The loan amount, you know, comes in. There's always going to be a gap between what the original deposit was and what the loan amount is. And you know, let's say they have to bring in an additional 10,000. Well, typically that's accounted for, so they know they're just not putting all that money in at once. So typically they're going to bring in that monies or those monies closer to the end of the transaction, because now escrow is going to tell them how much it needs to be, because now they have the figures from the lender. They've worked all their figures in terms of the expenses and costs to the buyer. So now they kind of know pretty much to the penny what they need to bring in, and they let them know. So that's when you deliver those funds. So loan funding, at this point, the transaction is almost complete. Typically, funding means that all has gone well with the transaction and it is able to commence completion. Escrow then performs a full accounting of the transaction fees and figures and reports them on an estimate closing statement, otherwise known as a settlement statement. Now, a lot of us have seen those as, or used to call those HUD ones. Now we call them closing disclosures and or settlement statements. Because things change from day to day, there is a typical pad, okay? Disbursement of funds will commence. So escrow will usually include a pad of $250 to $500 additional for the buyer to bring in. The majority of the time, because the escrow's estimates were accurate, they will get a refund of that money, of that pad. Sometimes it's not the full refund because there was some adjustments in closing, but a lot of times it is a full refund because, again, their estimate was accurate. Any questions or comments on that? So grant deed records. Typically, this is performed by the title and escrow company and is recorded by the county. Once a document is recorded, you, the agent, should confirm its recording with escrow or title prior to delivery of the property, unless otherwise agreed. Typically, escrow, when it's confirmed, will just simply send out an email to all parties saying we are confirmed. That's usually what happens. Sometimes they don't do that, but for the most part, that will give you pretty much the green light that the property has transferred, and the buyer, unless they have any delays, sometimes you might have the seller might request some additional days to move out, and or sometimes they want to rent back. So you might not go collect the keys right then and there, but the majority of the time it's at close of escrow that day you would transfer the property, right? So delivering possession, unless otherwise agreed, deliver the keys to your client along with remotes and utility information. Home warranty can also be delivered, including receipt and contract information. It is my experience that locks should be changed. I do not recommend keeping the keys that were given. So what I mean by that is yeah, they gave you the keys to get in, but that gives you now the authority and the opportunity to change all of the locks on the property that are on the outside. You don't know who has them. You don't know who has a copy of them. You don't know, what somebody's intentions could be because they now have keys to your property. So I always recommend that. Any questions or comments on that? All right, moving along. So delivery of closing information and checks. So escrow will finalize the transaction and make delivery of your client's closing package and agent package, including commission and refund checks. Please see your broker for payment of commissions. Most brokers will not pay an agent until they have a DRA compliant broker file. And usually that's where your transaction coordinator comes in. If you did it yourself, pat you on the back, good job, and make sure that you get that documentation. The majority of transaction coordinator services are paperless now. So now we're pretty much delivering a link to a cloud. Typically, the client and broker can download the entire file from that link into their own personal computer. They can have everything there from the transaction A to Z. And typically, that's how the delivery is going nowadays. Closing gifts and referrals. It is recommended that you acknowledge your client with a closing gift and respectfully ask for referrals and or a reference letter. So this has actually been one of my main sources of real estate clients is referrals. You usually find in real estate, there's usually two types of agents. There's the ones that kind of do all kinds of weird stuff, and then at the end of the transaction you never hear from them again, and that's because they know what they did. And then you have the kind of agents that do you well throughout the entire transaction, and they become lifelong friends. And typically those are the ones those are the agents that are going to continue to get referrals from their clients, mainly because they took care of their clients. So I used to give out Cutco knives, and it had the embroidery of my name and phone number on the side of the knife. And let me tell you, I had clients call me and say, "Hey, can I get some more of those?" I mean, they're $250 for 2 knives, so they're not cheap, and they do come with a lifetime warranty. But the thing about the knives is that it's one of those things that it doesn't go away. If you give out a closing gift, it's like a basket or maybe flowers or something that's disposable. That gift is realized for maybe about 2 weeks, and then they kind of forget about it. But if you give them something memorable, and actually the broker here, she gives out something really nice. It's kind of like it's a set of some kind, but it has the broker name all over it and that kind of thing. That's always a good thing to give out, because that's something that somebody won't throw away, and they're always going to see it, and they may even use it every day, right? So it's that constant reminder of what that broker did for you, and really how pleasant the transaction can be. That's that's pretty much the sentiment that you want to leave your clients with when you close a transaction. You don't want to be that kind of agent that kind of scoots off and says, "Oh yeah, you know what, this went wrong and this went wrong, and these guys are never going to want to talk to me again." No, you want to leave the sentiment with your client that you left on a good note, and here's a nice closing gift that pretty much you're going to use for years coming, and it literally is branded with your information. So highly recommend something like that. Any questions or comments on the final paperwork and or closing gifts? All righty. So let's do another fun fact. So most people don't realize it, but McDonald's is not a burger flipping restaurant chain. It is one of the world's best real estate portfolios. Franchisees do the burger flipping, and McDonald's gets paid handsomely for owning the best commercial real estate all over the world. So Ray Kroc, the originator of McDonald's, along with the McDonald's brothers, after he kicked them out, realized that if he owned the buildings that these restaurants were being operated from, that he could simply just collect the rents from the buildings and collect high rents for that matter. So because it's all over the world, you can imagine why they say that it's the world's best real estate portfolio. That's McDonald's trick, if you will, as to one of the reasons why they've been so successful in that chain. And I assume there's no comments on that. I think we talked about that previously. Another pop quiz. I don't remember putting this in here. What happens if the seller doesn't leave when they're supposed to? Anybody on that? I'm almost out of iced tea. So we close the transaction, and let's say that they had 3 days to leave on the contract, and for whatever reason, day 4 comes along and they're still there, and they're not responding to phone calls. They're still there. They're not leaving. What happens? Anybody? All right, yeah, Celia, very good. In the state of California, we have something called unlawful detainer. It becomes the buyer's responsibility, not the agent's, to evict them. So you have to go through the eviction process, because in the state of California, if you have residency in the property, there's only one way to get you out legally, and that's unlawful detainer. So yes, notice of eviction, Celia, thank you. What did I write down here? Let's see. In my view, broker's job is done, and the seller has no written or verbal contract with the agent to either represent them and perform a service he or she is not qualified for. And that's you, the agent. You're not qualified to kick people out. Your transaction actually is complete, right? And I've had agents call me and threaten me, "Hey, you better get your clients out of there." And I told them, "What do you want me to do? Go over there with a hammer and try to get them out of there?" I mean, that would be a crime, right? So the laws are in place for that. Now, do I tell my sellers that they can do that? No, I tell them, "Hey guys, you guys need to leave," right? So nice, very nicely tell them, but if they're not going to leave, they probably already know. So that said, right, it becomes the buyer's responsibility to remove the sellers, in my never to be humble opinion, of course. But yes, Celia, I would agree with you that notice of eviction, a lawful detainer would have to be obtained from the courts in order to get them out of there if they don't follow the contract. Now, does that mean that the buyer doesn't have any kind of liquidated damages? No, they do. They could potentially sue the seller now for their damages, which is now becomes a small claims if it's under the small claims amount, right? So just something to think about on that. Okay. Any questions or comments on that? And I noticed you put that in big bold letters. Has that ever happened to you, Celia, before? All right, so let's move on to final thoughts. So actually, we're doing really good on time. 6:44, we're on slide 16. So actually, we're pretty much at the end. So that was a fairly short presentation, but I think for some of us, because of the heat, it's kind of nice not to have to sit down for too long. Get back in the air conditioning and maybe a nice cool drink, right? So this information is meant to be helpful in working a transaction. Unfortunately, it is impossible to include all scenarios herein and is meant as a guide to the responsibilities typically seen in the transaction. Many other responsibilities and forms do exist and should be used appropriately as it relates to your transaction. The CAR website is a good source of information concerning the use of the forms and the DRE requirements of them. The broker or office manager is also a good source of information concerning eccentricities to your transaction. And that's because, some brokers do have their own little eccentricities and things that they like to do, right? Or you can always contact me, okay? Which, hey guys, I'm always an open book. You guys know that you can always call me, ask questions. If you're not sure about something or you're having problems putting something together, I'm always here to help, okay? My years of knowledge have allowed me to do things fairly quickly. So it's not like it's a burden. I actually did 2 legal things today for a couple of brokers, 2 different ones at separate times. I wrote up a trash out contract, and I also wrote up a purchase agreement for a wholesaler, and went about my business. It took me, I don't know, maybe half hour for each one. Not a big deal, but I do accept or expect compensation for those things when I'm doing work and taking time out of my day. But when it comes to a simple question, or you just kind of need guidance on something, because I don't charge for that. Just feel free to call me, and I'll, if I can't help you, I will definitely point you in the right direction. Okay. So any questions or comments on that? So moving on to affiliates and resources. Didn't see Larry today. He must be out and about, but there's my information, email address and website address. Okay. But there's Larry's information. He is our title representation. Since day one of the Zoom meetings, he's been pretty religiously coming on. I would say today's probably one of the days, or one of the only days I haven't seen him come on, so he must be busy. But feel free to call him with title stuff. He can also help you get work. He can help you with information as well, so he's a good source. There's Liz's information. She can give you a loan approval if you need it, or she's also a broker. She can also help you like I can. If you have any questions or comments about anything that you might be working on, okay? And then if you guys think you might need a little bit of support now on the motivational side, I do recommend Dave's product, David Plummer. He does his class on Saturdays. There's a meeting ID and password that he uses to get onto that meeting. And I highly recommend, if you don't get on regularly, at least maybe once every other month or maybe once a month. Very motivational. Dave knows what he's doing and he knows what he's talking about. And I do definitely endorse his product. Okay, now, does he charge? Yeah, he's a coach. He's a real estate coach. He does charge for, if you're going to go see him, like say during the week, he's going to spend 2 or 3 hours with you, making sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, and he will get you work. Well, actually, you'll get it yourself, but he'll tell you how to do it, right? very well rounded piece of information, if you will, and motivational stuff that he does. I did a show with him. Matter of fact, I think I showed it maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago. Dave was on the real estate rant, and I was able to interview him and talk about his product. So I definitely endorse that for you guys that need that motivation. Okay. And then there's Shameen. She is with Property ID. They have a new product called Max. Anybody that is in need of an NHD, like say you have a listing or you're currently going into contract, I do recommend Property ID. Shameen just happens to be the account executive for this area, and she came to visit me. So they are now a supporter of this program. Okay. Any questions or comments? All right. So it looks like we're done for today. So short class today. I mean, usually we're ending right around 7:30, but if anybody want to unmic yourself or unmute yourself, if you have any questions or comments or anything you're working on, feel free to share as any information that you guys talk about, the whole class can learn from. So that's why I always encourage you guys to talk about any questions or comments or things that you're working on here on the presentation, so others can learn from it. You're welcome, Melissa. Good seeing you. Still waiting for your email though. I know you mentioned wanting to take the next step. You're welcome, Victoria. My pleasure. Thank you guys, Sully and Robert. We'll have lunch soon. Hope you guys like mariscos because that's what I'm craving. Okay, so since you guys are still here, oh, we lost Victoria. Too bad she launched out, because we have, because this was only two parts of this presentation. There's only 3 of us here now, but these are the ones that are available for upcoming for next week. I believe that these are all just 1-part presentations. So, okay, somebody likes understanding competition. Anybody else care to vote? Robert Sully, Melissa, Celia. I don't know who voted for that, but there's 3 of us, so we can at least make a concerted effort for next week's training. The cell, that's a good one. Right now, the cell is a little bit more. I don't know if you guys have ever seen American Hustle. American Hustle is like one of my favorite movies with Kristen Bale, and there is some things in that movie that we talk about on the cell. So this is the side cell, the up cell, the down cell, the short cell, the soft cell, right? These are all things that we do sometimes subconsciously. And all right, so Melissa may have voted. So I'm assuming that one of you maybe didn't. So who didn't vote? Because what I'll do is we can do the understanding competition next week, and then the following week we can do the cell. How's that sound, guys? That sound okay? So we got 2 votes. So anyway, that said, it's good seeing you guys. We'll see if we get some more people. Believe it or not, I think last week there was 69 people that were registered on this meeting, and then I looked again today, there's 72. So why these people are registering and not coming on, I don't know. But for the most part, the emails go out, the text messages go out, and so I don't know, maybe it's timing. So if you guys need a different time to do the meetings or different day, that can be arranged. So if it's convenience, that's the nice thing about Zoom meetings, is we can move them around a little bit. You know, I'd like to try and keep the same schedule just so we can have a routine. But for the people that are interested and are coming on, you know, you guys can always let me know. Okay, yeah, Robert and Sully for sure. I mean, that's one of the reasons I like 6 o'clock on Wednesdays. It's pretty convenient. But other than that, unless you guys have anything that you guys would like to talk about, discuss, you know, how was your weekend, that kind of thing, um, we're pretty much done. So I'm gonna go ahead and sign off, guys. Thanks for coming on, and I'll see you guys next week. Okay.